Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you again here at Russian International Affairs Council. Today we have a presentation of a very interesting report prepared by our colleagues from European Leadership Network, the strategic case for EU-Russia cooperation. I must say that we have a long history of cooperation with European Leadership Network. It was started several years ago, in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, and it is now being developed within several formats. First, we have a high-level group from ELN and REAC, and it's a privilege for us to have here today General Trubnikov, who is one of the members of this high-level group. We have a younger generation leaders group, and at least twice a year we meet to discuss urgent problems in Russia-West relations. We have an expert track of this discussion, and in London last year we conducted a joint expert meeting on Russia-EU relations, and a very interesting report was was written by our colleagues afterwards. So this partnership has a long history, and it was a pleasure for me to be among the first readers of the report. I found it very provocative intellectually and constructive politically. And now we have a chance to listen here at REAC to the co-authors of the report, Mr. Lukasz Kulesa and Mr. Joseph Dobbs. And I propose the following structure of today's meeting. First, our colleagues from ELN present key points, and then we also asked two our Russian colleagues, Nikolai Koveshnikov and Sergei Utkin, who also critically reviewed the reports to make their contribution, and then to open a discussion, open and frank, like we have always in Russian Council. I must underline that we have broadcasting in the internet now, so this meeting is open. Everyone can join us at a distant format. We will have it at our website, so no Chatham House today. Okay, and now I pass the floor to Dr. Lukasz Kulesa. Lukasz, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ivan, also for making me a doctor. I'm not there yet, but on my way. And maybe just one technical remark, that after we manage to solve all the problems of the EU-Russia relations, actually in the second part of this meeting we'll move to the NATO-Russia relations and then solve all the problems there. So please stay tuned for the second session, which also deal with NATO and Russia. But let me start with thanking REAC sincerely for the invitation and for organizing this seminar. As Ivan already mentioned, we had a long and very fruitful history of cooperation with REAC, the REAC members, and we are also very thankful to you for giving us these opportunities and the access to the Russian foreign and security establishment. Special thanks to Ivan and also to Natalia, who helped in organizing this particular event. I am the research director at the European Leadership Network, and I was involved heavily in producing the report on EU-Russia relations, but not enough to be among one of the authors. One of the co-authors is with me, Mr. Joseph Dobbs. He is a research fellow at the ELN, and he is responsible for the European issues, also for EU-China and now also EU-Russia relations. If you allow a couple of words about the ELN, because it might not be familiar to everyone. The European Leadership Network is basically combining two missions. First, this is a network of former, current and emerging European political, military and diplomatic leaders, all the people who are interested in the foreign and security policy challenges facing Europe and are interested in addressing them through collaborative efforts. And I'm really happy that we also have a number of Russian participants in the network. But secondly, the ELN is also a London-based non-partisan think tank, which does what think tanks do, which means producing research, issuing publication, organizing track to dialogues and events, including those that Ivan mentioned. And we are here in Moscow at the particular time. We are a couple of days after the NATO summit in Warsaw, and exactly on the day that we have the meeting of the NATO-Russia Council. We also, a couple of weeks after the UK referendum on European Union, also the publication of the EU global strategy and the decision to prolong EU sanctions on Russia. So at this time, when basically the history is made before our eyes, it is very important that we have these opportunities for frank and constructive dialogue. And the last thing from the introduction, let me just say that we present the results of the research conducted in our second capacity as the think tank and ELN office. So these views do not represent the views and position of all the members of the network. Now into the EU-Russia paper entitled "The Strategic Case for EU-Russia Competition." You'll basically be the first wider audience to see the results of this work. As Ivan mentioned, we shared this paper with a number of experts in Russia, in EU countries, to seek their opinion, but the official publication will be next week. But why to have yet another report on EU-Russia relations? We feel it's not just because the relationship is in deepest crisis since probably the 1990s, but also because we feel that some of the reports and some of the policy briefs, journalistic pieces about the EU-Russia relationship may not be entirely satisfactory for two main reasons. The first reason is some of these reports are very much short-term oriented. So they focus on the next round of sanctions, on the situation on Ukraine, on the relationship between European Union and Eurasian Economic Union, but they don't really look at the broader picture. But secondly, some reports consider that the future for the European Union and Russia is basically a future of coexistence. In a sense, not cooperation, but cooperating on a very, very narrow issues of common interests, and basically deconflicting everything else. So if you like, Russia pivoting towards the east, and the European Union just looking inside and not to its east. And the authors of this report, this particular report, they try to establish if there is a rationale for a more cooperative relationship between the EU and Russia. So not assuming that we need each other, but rather asking whether we need each other and how strongly we need each other. And the best way to check it, we figure out, is through doing a SWOT analysis, so looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for Russia and for the EU, because that would allow us to compare our positions and check where there is a match between the EU and Russia, which is strong enough to allow us for cooperation, and where is possibly a mismatch that makes this cooperation very unlikely. Now the final note on the EU referendum, the final note from me. The two of us are here, neither of us actually expected the results of the referendum. Neither of us expected that the Leave campaign is going to win, which also meant that this particular report needs to be reworked a little bit. But we still act on the assumption that in the next months and in next years, the UK will remain an EU member, perhaps less active, perhaps focused on the withdrawal negotiations, but still a member of the Union. At the same time, there is no sense in denying that Brexit, if it happens, when it happens, will weaken the European Union also in its external policy. It will also limit the attractiveness of the European Union to the outside actors, including Russia. During the campaign, the referendum campaign in the UK, many people claimed that Russia and personally President Putin will be happy to see the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. We have the suspicion that the case is much more complicated, and there is much more to this than just headlines from the newspapers. So we'll be very happy to discuss further the consequences of the referendum also for Russia. And now let me pass the floor to my colleague Joseph Dobbs, who will present this report in much more details.
Thank you, Lukasz. Good morning. First of all, I'd like to echo Lukasz's words of thanks to REACT for hosting us here in Moscow, and to Ivan for chairing this meeting, to all of you for attending. Indeed, as Lukasz said, that these are quite extreme times in which we live, so hopefully we can make some sense of them today. I'm going to begin by presenting mine and Dr. Ian Kearns, the ELN's Research Director's paper, titled The Strategic Case for EU-Russia Cooperation. As Lukasz already explained the rationale for the paper, an attempt to look beyond the current crisis that we face, but to try and look towards the long-term reasons why we must cooperate rather than just coexist. I'll move straight into the SWOT analysis, which is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing both Russia independently and then the EU independently, and then I'll try and tie them together in the end. So first of all, beginning with Russia's strengths. First of all, actually I should say that I don't have the time today to go through every strength and weakness in detail, nor does the paper cover absolutely every strength, weakness, opportunity and threat. We just have tried to give an overview of the most important and the most pressing facing both sides. So for Russia, we find obviously its major strengths come with regards to its energy resources, its military power, its defense industry, aspects of its geography, and the diplomatic reach these components provide. Russia, for example, accounts for just under 20% of global gas exports, and with a lot of the world's other energy powers in unstable regions, and with demand rising, particularly in Asia, which Russia is very well placed to access, Russia has a strong future ahead with regards to energy. In terms of military power, Russia is of course the world's fourth largest spender and the second largest exporter. In terms of geography, and I think this is really important, Russia is located obviously between Europe and Asia, and as a result it's well placed to make the most in both developed markets in the West and obviously emerging markets in the East. Diplomatically, Russia uses these strengths along with others mentioned in greater detail in the paper to good effect. Internationally and regionally, Russia is exceptionally well networked. In terms of weaknesses, structural weaknesses in your economy are by far Russia's greatest weakness. An over-reliance on energy has exposed the country to hardship in the wake of falling oil prices. Moreover, it is unclear to most how Russia can diversify its economy away from energy while it is heavily sanctioned, and more importantly, while its productivity is low and spends so little on research and development relative to the rest of the developed world. Demographically, like the rest of Europe, Russia faces challenges that will only serve to compound its economic problems. While there have been improvements in Russia's birth rate recently, you still face an aging society in the future which, without an increase in productivity, will significantly increase budgetary responsibilities and make it more difficult to develop your economy away from energy. There are many more weaknesses outlined in the paper, but I think another critical one facing Russia in an increasingly connected and polarized world is soft power. That most rankings rank Russia very low, if at all, should be a concern for Moscow. This is especially true as the world becomes, as I said, more polarized. Obviously, it's a new phenomenon in international affairs, but one that I would encourage colleagues in this room and colleagues elsewhere in Moscow to take note of. In terms of opportunities, Russia has many as well. Ultimately, and I think the main opportunity is to become a bridge power in a far more influential and developed Eurasian space. In this context, Russia's clearest opportunity comes with the development of Asia and China. As I've already mentioned, Russia is geographically very well positioned and diplomatically well networked to exploit developments in Asia. Russia's relations with China have developed a great deal since President Putin came to power. A deal on settling the Russia-China border was an enormously important step in laying the groundwork for mammoth gas deals that we've seen in recent years. Now, China's One Belt, One Road infrastructure project has undoubtedly opportunities for Russian companies and Russians across the country. And development in Asia's markets mean, hopefully, for Russia, there will be plenty of customers for your vast energy supplies. But given the economic power of Europe, regardless of whether or not the UK remains a member of the European Union, Russia can also be a connector of the world's largest established market, i.e. the European Union, to emerging markets in the East. Now, in threats, the opportunities in Asia bring me to one of the most pressing threats facing Russia, the threat of Chinese domination. This is in the long term, of course. Details of pricing around Russia's mammoth gas deal with China have not been made public, but it's fair to assume that Beijing got a good deal, which is unfortunately a sign of what may be to come in the future of bilateral Russia-China relations. Combined concerns over Chinese influence with a fear in Moscow that the West is pushing its influence further into Russia's neighborhood, and then the threat of encirclement may feel very real sitting in the Kremlin. It will be a long time indeed before Russia becomes as important to China as the West, given the sheer volume of Chinese trade relations with both Europe and the United States, and the need for them to maintain their high levels of growth. The West will just, unfortunately for Russia, may remain far more important than Russia in the coming years. Meaning that if Russia and if the West and China can develop their relations, and it is a big if, but if they can, Russia also faces the threat of being isolated from a newly networked global order. Now, there are other critical threats facing Russia, and I urge you all to read the paper when it's published next week, but they include the risk of political instability, which I say, speaking as someone from the United Kingdom experiencing that at the moment, also international terrorism with a potentially nuclear element, and climate change. And I think on climate change is quite an important one, because I think there is some belief in some articles I've read from Russian colleagues that climate change is not as big a threat to Russia as it might be to the rest of the world or to the West, based on the fact that you have quite large energy reserves. I think that to a certain extent has some validity. However, should permafrost in Siberia melt, then some of your vital pipeline infrastructure could be at risk, and whether or not you have the funds to fix that problem is unclear in coming years. But also the way in which climate change threatens stability, economic stability, and therefore political stability in Central Asia could mean crises in that region, and given increasing Chinese involvement in the region, may not result in a good deal for Russia. Now, in an attempt to make sure that this is a balanced presentation, we come on to the EU's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and they're just as numerous and severe as those facing Russia in the coming years. Now, in terms of strengths, despite slow growth in recent years, the EU remains the world's largest single market. And while the EU's economy is in relative decline, it will remain sometime one of the world's largest economies. In terms of defence, the EU's security is largely guaranteed by the overlap of 22, or perhaps soon to be 21, of its member states with NATO. Moreover, even without the UK, an EU member state maintains an independent nuclear deterrent and is very well networked, that is France. The EU also has a solidarity clause invoked by the French for the first time in response to the November 2015 terrorist attacks in Paris. Now this is EU security dynamics is still in development, but they stand to get stronger in coming years. Moreover, both the EU's economy and its security are strengthened by quite strong a transatlantic link. As a result of these strengths, and others outlined in more detail in the paper, the EU has enormous combined diplomatic footprint. The EU and its member states are bilaterally very well networked in the G7, the G20, the United Nations, and I could go on. Now, in terms of weaknesses, the EU is of course not without them, including the one exposed by voters in my country late last month, which I will address later in this presentation, and I would very much welcome all of your comments and questions after. One of the EU's biggest weaknesses is of course its economic structure, just as it is with Russia. A monetary union of some member states without a corresponding fiscal union, an increasingly fraught dynamic between those members in the Eurozone and those members outside of the Eurozone, have fueled stagnant growth and crises across the Eurozone, which, while some in Europe might hope have gone away, are likely to rear their ugly head again later this year perhaps, or next year. Energy security is also a weakness for the European Union. Extremely reliant on foreign energy, Russia, for example, accounting for around a third of both oil and gas imports to the European Union. This is a major concern in Brussels and has spurred a push in recent years to talk about an energy union and to attempts to diversify away from both fossil fuels and fossil fuel imports from Russia. Demography, which is a concern for Russia, as I mentioned, is a significant weakness going forward for the European Union. Based on our analysis of population projections of the United Nations, the EU by 2030 will have over 28% of its population over the age of 65 and will lose some 20 million of working age. The EU will have to adapt to this future whilst also facing major economic and political challenges in the present. This is a massive problem in terms of productivity going forward and in our attempts in the European Union to maintain our position as the world's most preeminent single market. The most serious weakness of the EU, however, was demonstrated on the 23rd of June. The British vote to leave the EU, known as Brexit, both highlights profound disunity in the EU and potentially exacerbates it. The risk of a domino threat from the UK leaving to other member states leaving in the coming years is very, very real, and one that is spurred massive talks in both London and in Brussels. The UK still, however, needs to negotiate its exit, and when it does leave, it is likely that for the near future and the medium future, the UK will continue to align with the EU on many foreign policy issues, including vis-à-vis Russia. So I think that in terms of its impact on EU-Russia relations, as I will explain later, it will have an impact on calculations here in Moscow as to the need for closer ties with the EU, but hopefully, as I can demonstrate, that they should not go altogether. Now, in terms of opportunities for the European Union, despite the uncertainty caused by Brexit, the EU still has a number of important opportunities it can seize. Economically, with or without the UK, it remains one of the world's largest single markets. Its developed consumer market and intellectual capital will see the EU remain in a strong position to forge relations with emerging markets around the world. You can see this last year with, for example, President Xi Jinping of China's visit across Europe, and they're rolling out the red carpet for EU leaders in coming years. The EU, for example, is already host to around half of the FDI from BRICS countries, demonstrating that whilst there is, of course, an emerging new global institutions, the EU remains and is likely to remain for some time one of the world's most popular investment locations. Now, these are just a flavour of the strengths, weaknesses and opportunities and threats facing Russia and the EU. Ian Kearns and I have outlined in the paper in more detail, and again I urge you to read that next week. What these independent SWOT analyses show, hopefully, is that there is a very strong case in both Brussels and here in Moscow for cooperation in the long term, a case that I think is missed by officials in Brussels often, and I think definitely also missed here by some in the Kremlin. So in terms of the strategic case, we have outlined in chapter 3 of our report what happens in our view if we don't cooperate. And what ends up happening is strengths will be diminished, as we've mentioned, the strengths for both the EU and Russia, weaknesses exacerbated, opportunities missed, and threats go unmanaged. What's also shown us, these SWOT analyses, is that Russia is neither the all-powerful enemy nor the devastated economy that is sometimes portrayed as in European media, and conversely the EU, despite its many challenges, remains one of the most influential and resilient bodies with immense opportunities despite media narratives both here and of course in the European Union itself. In this context, I'll go on to talk about how strengths will be diminished. I think the clearest way they'll be diminished is economically. I mean, first, confrontation with the West is limiting Russia's ability to make the most of your potential economically. Sanctions on Russia have made your economy smaller, and of course, your economy has also been damaged by falling oil prices. But compound that with sanctions, it's been a real problem, as mentioned by both President Putin and the Deputy Prime Minister. Sanctions on Russia impact by delaying important infrastructure projects in the Far East, for example pipelines, and unreportedly unfavourable deals with the Chinese. Challenges with other large projects, particularly a bridge in connecting Crimea with Russia, with the rest of Russia, is a concern. From the EU's perspective, confrontation with Russia is also diminishing its economic strength, albeit to a lesser extent than Russia's. However, as you'll all know, that the EU has had low growth in recent years, and that's exacerbated many of our other problems. So this means that any impact on our growth is acutely felt. Moreover, the economic impact of poor relations with Russia are being disproportionately felt in those countries more economically exposed to Russia, thus potentially exacerbating disparities between member states. Weaknesses will also be exacerbated. The current confrontation with the West is likely to prolong Russia's long-term economic stagnation and decline, and potentially encourage aspects of political instability. Without access to the EU capital and technology, which is something that I happily see mentioned in several Russian papers on this issue, without access to EU capital and technology, for which an Asian alternative is not yet viable, and will not be viable for some time to come, Russia will find it very difficult to diversify and modernise its economy, and its state finances will likely slide further into crisis. This is also a concern when we consider the demographic problems that Russia and the European Union will face in coming years. For the EU, confrontation with Russia has shown its ability to exacerbate one of its biggest weaknesses, its toxic politics around immigration. Inability to solve the Syrian crisis, which would have been easier had the EU and other partners and Russia cooperated, saw thousands upon thousands of refugees land on Europe's shores, an untold humanitarian crisis, and of course a political crisis from which the EU is still reeling, and one that definitely played into the hands of Leave voters and Leave campaign in the United Kingdom. I think very importantly, opportunities for both sides will be missed if they continue as things continue as they are. As China expands its economic activity ever westwards, both Russia and the EU risk missing a big chance. The end destination of China's Silk Road is Europe, and Russia can only be a strong bridge power if there is a strong destination to make the bridge itself worthwhile. This is to say that just as strong ties in Asia strengthen Russia's hand in negotiations with Europe, strong ties with Europe would also strengthen your hand in terms of negotiations in Beijing. There is also an opportunity emerging in the Arctic with the North Sea Passage and potential energy resources in that region, and they will be significantly easier to seize that opportunity if there is cooperation between both sides, which is why I welcome that it was mentioned as a potential area of cooperation in the European Union's recent global strategy. Threats will go unmanaged as well. Without cooperation, Russia and the EU leave a number of threats unmanaged. They are outlined in detail in the paper, but the most pressing is potentially the inadequately managed threat of terrorism. As a direct consequence of failed contradictory strategies in the Middle East and North Africa, the EU and Russia face a graver threat than they might have otherwise. The Russian military intervention in Syria, moreover, while being scaled back, has increased the risk of Russia and Western powers being dragged into the Syrian civil war on opposite sides. Neither Russia nor the EU has all the intelligence and counter-terrorism capabilities it needs to deal with this threat alone. By facing the challenge of a homegrown Islamist threat and foreign fighter problem, both sides would be better placed. If the EU and the UK, hopefully after Brexit, and Russia can cooperate and work together more effectively to deal with the terrorist threat, we would be better placed to overcome it. And again, as I mentioned before, I think climate change is a major risk for the UK, for the European Union, and a major risk for Europe and Russia. And obviously, I'm pleased that cooperation wasn't stopped in Paris last year, and I very much hope that it can continue on both a bilateral and multilateral level. Now, in terms of how to go forward, we're not naive to the fact that this is a very idealized vision of what the potential for Russia and the European Union is, and there are significant hurdles which must be overcome in the short term before we can get to the point where we can start exploring this strategic case that myself and Dr. Ian Kearns have outlined. In our final chapter, we outline an 8-point plan that we hope gets both sides to the point where they can make the most of their combined potential. And I'll try and go through this relatively quickly so we can have as much time for response and as possible. First of all, we need to prevent the relationship from worsening still. The European Leadership Network colleagues there have outlined many ways in which both sides could have seen the relationship get significantly worse. Close military encounters in particular, colleagues including Thomas Freer, and as just outlined, a case for a cooperative airspace agreement. And I think that we definitely need to look at ways to make sure that this doesn't get even worse. Secondly, a gradual lifting of EU sanctions, but that must be in return for a gradual but clear implementation of the Minsk agreements. Thirdly, a combined EU-Russia effort to provide assistance to all those affected by the conflict in eastern Ukraine. The success of Ukraine is of vital importance both for the EU and Russia to cooperate together, but also for independently. Should Ukraine fail, it exacerbates all the weaknesses that I've mentioned in this paper. Selective engagement on issues of mutual interest is the fourth point that we make. This would include dialogue on Syria, on cooperation on nuclear issues, and I must point out that I think it is a great shame that Russia did not attend the Nuclear Security Summit, and I hope that we can find ways to make sure that we do cooperate on these issues in future. On climate change, on opening a dialogue between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, and I think this is the place where we could talk about China's potential, an endorsement of people-to-people initiatives, many of which the ELN and REAC I'm sure are involved in, dialogue on the fundamentals of the European order and competing narratives, because I think that what a recent report from the European Leadership Network and REAC on competing narratives shows is that this problem that we face right now won't be changed or solved rather by a change in leadership on either side. It goes far deeper than that, and we need to talk about the underlying differences in opinion that we have before we can talk about the future. Support for Track 2 dialogues is something that I think everyone can agree with, but I think most importantly, I think a commitment to active diplomacy without preconditions. And in this, Ian Kearns and I call for the convening of an EU-Russia summit in the second half of this year, so as in the next 5 months hopefully. And I think suggestions that a summit would constitute either a reward for Russian behaviour or a sign of the EU's willingness to return to business as usual are not convincing. Diplomatic engagement is not a reward for anything. It's a necessity given the fact that the EU and Russia are neighbours, share the same strategic space and disagree about many things, and share many of the same threats. So I hope we can, that's something that we can all agree on. Anyway, this concludes my presentation, and let me again thank you all for listening patiently, and I will happily now pass over the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for inspiring presentation. Now I'm passing the floor to our contributors. Folks, try to be brief. You have 10 minutes each. Sergey, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for a very interesting report that you prepared. I think it's a very good reminder of the good basis we have for EU-Russia cooperation, that we are still important to one another, whatever political obstacles are. So that's an important effort that you made. But I will not spend much time on compliments regarding your work, just to be more brief, and I will try to single out those lines in your report that I more disagree with or have doubts about, so that could probably help the further discussion, as we have a lot of very distinguished experts on Europe and international relations in general in this room, so we still have to leave enough time for them to speak as well. you pay a lot of attention to how the EU and Russia see threats. And you put to the forefront threats they see in each other. It's like when you speak about threats that Russia sees, you speak about encirclement, and that's primarily the concerns related to NATO policies. When you speak about threats to the EU, you speak about the Russian behavior. But I would say that you just take in a too straightforward manner the statements made on diplomatic level between Russia and the West. In the end, it may even happen that both Russia and the West feel more relaxed in what they are doing in relations to each other, just because they know that major conflict will not happen. So they don't really perceive it as a threat, but they don't like the policies, the actions of the other side. So there is a difference between trying to prevent your counterpart from doing this or that, and seeing this counterpart as a threat. I still think that even with all the troubles that we have today, Russia and the West are still not seeing each other as a real threat to them. On the contrary, if we speak about threats emanating from the South, that you mentioned, but somewhere with a lower priority than those between Russia and the West directly. When we speak about extremist movements, when we speak about the demographic challenges that may come, not as much from China as you write, but from the poorest regions of the world that may become sources of uncontrollable migrations that will affect all developed countries of the world, including the EU, including Russia. That's an important challenge that you could see as a real threat in the longer term. So that's probably something we should think more about, and what would be a good policy about those challenges, because of course it's a good pretext for various populist forces in all of our countries to make these challenges instruments for what they want to achieve in their political fights. You pay a lot of attention to how Russian-Chinese relations can develop in the future, and you also see it as a potential or even real threat. I think, again, if you try to look closer at this issue, you see that when you speak about Russia and China, you speak about two nuclear powers. You speak about the major global players that basically have, if you allow the term, mutually assured coexistence. So they're just doomed to cooperate, to live nearby, to develop infrastructure that would link them together. And I don't think that those perceptions of China as a threat should go any further than some, populist political debate. When you look at the issue closer, you see that there are rather opportunities in this Russian-Chinese relationship. We may have difficulties to use the potential that is embodied in this relationship, but we can do that if we act in a smart way. And even if we lose the chance to use this potential potential to the full, I still think that China will not really become a threat to Russia anytime soon. China sees as its major policy concern the southern seas, the Pacific Ocean. They look that way. And again, if you think in terms of demographic challenges, I think it's more about potential threats that may come through Central Asia that we should be caring about, because these threats may be not a result of state policy of some particular state actor, but a result of some chaotic processes that we have to pay attention to. You mentioned that you will have to make changes to your report given the developments around Brexit, but you understand that in the next few years the UK will remain the member of the European Union. That's why you can kind of think less about that in terms of EU-Russia relations. But I do think that even in the next couple of years, or even in the next few months, we may already feel the impact, or as some people put it these days, a fallout of Brexit, also in the questions related to the EU-Russia relations. Because the process of negotiations between Brussels and London, between London and other capitals of the member states, will be very painstaking, and it would be probably one of the ideas that people would discuss in London, how they can use relations with third countries outside of the EU in order to strengthen the British positions worldwide and in negotiations with the EU, yet before the actual leaving of the EU happens. So that's something we should keep in mind, and probably there will be, of course, a significant degree of speculation here. You cannot know in advance what the impact will be, but you have to probably put Brexit in a single subchapter of your report, and to elaborate further on what the impact could be. When you speak about the threats to the EU, you also put Brexit as a kind of one of particular examples of how the EU may break up. But the EU may not break up in the end, but the Brexit per se will be an important factor that you could, under certain circumstances, call a threat to the EU. So that's something to think about as well. You mentioned the transatlantic trade and investment partnership as one of the opportunities for the EU, and I hope that there is still a chance that it will be used as an opportunity. But I see such a growing opposition in a number of significant EU countries to the very idea of having this kind of a deal with the US, that I get more and more skeptical to what can be achieved in this regard. But that's just a minor remark. Regarding the recommendations that you make, the pathway to better shape of the EU-Russia relations, of course, as always in any kind of analysis, it's easier to show what we have today, and it's harder to predict the future. It's harder to elaborate on what kind of recipes can work in the years to come. But still, I'm kind of more disappointed with this recommendations part than with the rest of the report. First, number of points you make. That's about the Minsk agreements. It's about the selective engagement, people-to-people contacts. It's basically a direct reference to the 5 principles of the EU-Russia relations formulated by Federica Mogherini, and at least you have to say it directly that this is a reference to these principles, that you support them, and you think that this is a good way forward. And these principles don't look like a possibility for a breakthrough. It's more like a description of what we have as of today. We do have selective engagement. We had good cooperation of Russia and the EU on Iran nuclear program, for example, and things like that. We do have dialogue going on the conflict resolution in Ukraine, but when you get to the details, you stumble at various details that matter, and you don't address them in the report. You write about the gradual removal of sanctions. The first thing that we have to do in order to progress in negotiations on conflict resolution in Ukraine is to agree the modality of the elections in the Donbas, and for that you need Ukraine to play this game. You need Kyiv to change the legislation, and basically, as of today, Kyiv has the best possible option. They ensure that the sanctions against Russia are still in place, that Russia is kind of feeling the pain from what happened 2 years ago, and that's the situation they want to keep. So how you motivate the Kyiv government to play this game, to make the Minsk agreements implementable, and to lead to the removal of sanctions, if the core interest of the current Ukrainian government is not to allow the removal of sanctions happen. And I don't see how you can make this removal of sanctions gradual. You basically have it already divided in the Crimea sanctions and the Donbas sanctions, and when we speak about the removal of sanctions, we speak about the removal of the Donbas sanctions, and most probably if they get removed altogether. I don't believe that we can design some kind of a process for gradual removal of sanctions. The last thing is, I have already run out of time. The summits, you also stress that we could take use of revival of the summits between the EU and Russia, but keep in mind who takes part in those summits on the EU side. If that's like dialogue with the European Commission, we can have it. We have European commissioners coming to Russia. We had Jean-Claude Juncker participating in the St. Petersburg Economic Forum just recently, and there is not much progress to be achieved, because each time when we discuss something with Jean-Claude Juncker, he has to get back to the member states and to assure that there is a consensus among every with participation of every member state of the EU regarding any step forward in relations with Russia. And if we get back just to regular EU-Russia summit format that we had, then we just add to Jean-Claude Juncker Donald Tusk, and I'm not sure that this is to help us progress in any respect. So probably we should think less about the formats that we can use to improve EU-Russia relations, and more about what we can deliver, be it on Ukraine crisis, be it on people-to-people contacts where visa issues are basically stalled because they were linked to the sanctions. That's what we should think about, and in some respects I think the UK could actually play a standalone role on those issues. Take the people-to-people contacts. The UK is already not the part of the Schengen agreements. It has its own visa policy, and it has free hands to improve its visa relations with Russia if it has political will to do so. So that's probably the major stumbling block that we are getting to, that there is not the lack of formats, not the lack of summits, there is so far a lack of political will to get forward in the EU-Russia relations. Sorry for taking more time than I was supposed to.
Thank you, Sergey. Nikolai, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank our colleagues from ELN for a very comprehensive and very interesting report, very interesting vision about what could be done and what should not be done in EU-Russia relations. It's really a good food to think about, to discuss about. Because of shortage of time, I would also to concentrate more on some critical and reflection remarks about the report, and not on underlining the every good idea that I found, because there are a lot. First of all, you've mentioned that you made a middle-term and long-term analysis. What are possible strategic long-term opportunities, threats, benefits of possible cooperation and non-cooperation between European Union and Russia? Very good. I can even quote one of the numerous phrases. European Union can provide Russia with capital investment, technology, access to research and development, education cooperation. Russia could be a very big market for European consumer goods and services, etc., etc. I read the phrases like this many times since late 90s. I even wrote many times the phrases like this. In 2002, in 2004, in 2006. I still believe, but the real question is of another nature. Why we failed to transform these potential benefits of our long-term potential cooperation in reliable and stable economic and political partnership? Why we fail during the 20 years of our cooperation? Why we are sitting here and discussing the crisis, the political crisis? This is the real question, and I have no answer. But I do believe that some attempts to answer this question might be included in your report. Second point.
Well, just 1 second of interruption. To interrupt you, we did it within REAC ELN high-level group and also expert group, so we made some hypotheses on this.
Sorry. So this is my personal shortage. I have not read this report. Second point. Within the 40 or 50 pages of the report, I found only one phrase about possible cooperation between European Union and Eurasian Economic Union. One phrase in the conclusions. Well, I should underline that this is a very important and very promising idea. Of course, Eurasian Economic Union is not very efficient. There are some institutional shortages. There are some political shortages which might restrict the future development of Eurasian Economic Union. But, nevertheless, it does exist. Several questions should be negotiated exclusively with Eurasian Economic Commission. I mean custom union issues. There are also a set of issues which might be negotiated within the framework European Union, Eurasian Economic Union. Investment liberalization, technical regulation, the issues of intellectual property, probably the dispute settlement in economic issues. At least Eurasian Economic Commission has been permanently expressing the will to negotiate with Brussels. No clear answer from Brussels and no clear ideas within Europods. How this can be managed. Point number 3. One comment about future development of the European Union. I do believe that not only because of Brexit, but also because of Brexit, we will see a very in deep reform, in deep reconstruction of the European Union in the forthcoming years. During the last 20 years, we can see more and more elements of flexible integration within the European Union. Many groups and subgroups of EU member states which cooperate in one issues, in another issues. Many overlapping structures of cooperation. That's good, but since 2009-2010, since the attempts to fight the financial crisis and the crisis of Eurozone, we could see the trend, we could see the slow transformation of these many groups of cooperation in the structure of the core and periphery. More united core of the European Union and more identifiable, and the periphery which we could identify more clearly. And I suppose that Brexit will contribute this trend of development of the European Union. How this reformed, reconstructed, reinvented European Union would be able to maintain relations with Russia. Who will be the main negotiator or negotiators? Juncker, Merkel, Sarkozy, or I don't know. But this is a problem to think about. Looking at the list of proposals, of your proposals, I can support many of them. For example, I completely agree that the most urgent task is to minimize, to establish new efficient mechanisms to prevent military incident. Yes, of course, it's the most important and the most urgent issue. I should also support the idea of gradual lifting of sanctions. It's better than the previous idea all for all. The total implementation of Minsk agreement, and only after that sanctions will be lifted. This is a bad idea because the factor of Minsk, who is willing to benefit from non-implementation of Minsk agreement. Gradual lifting of sanctions might give an opportunity to stimulate Kiev to fulfill its part of the task. I also support the idea to initiate a political dialogue about future European security architecture. Because from my point of view, this is the most important issue. Without this, nothing would work efficiently. People-to-people contacts, economic links, institutional relations between European Union and Moscow, legal approximation which took place between Russia and European Union, regulatory convergence, all this is good, and all this did work during the last 20 years. But all this was enabled to provide a stable platform for Russia-European Union relation in the absence of reliable security architecture in Europe. We should speak about big issues, but this is one track. The second track, small steps, small practical steps, and we should be rather pragmatic and rather realistic. I don't believe in energy partnership, etc., etc. Brussels and Moscow failed to establish energy partnership within the framework of good political climate, because this is the matter of money distribution, benefits, assets allocation, and of course it's even more difficult to establish such kind of partnership now. All this idea is not only about energy but also about economy, etc., etc. So we should think about small steps, about small practical steps. Not energy partnership, but for example energy predictability, exchange of forecasts of energy consumption and energy production, something like this. And in conclusion, I want to express two thoughts about two major factors which might shape the nature of relations between Russia and European Union. Factor number one: we both are two slow-growing economies in the world. This is probably the most important similarity between us. And not very good similarity. And within the globalized world, within the increasing global competition, we are in position of potentially losing position. The second factor, European politician, Russian politician, they may like each other, dislike each other, they may criticize each other, etc., etc., and they have a lot of things to criticize. But I believe politicians and we as academic experts, we should always remember about the real threat. The real threat from the south, I mean Islamism, extremism. We will be no other European Union, and we will be no other Russia. So we should try to find a common language, one with each other. In the view of this common challenge, I want to quote one colleague from Europe. Several months ago, he expressed, the meeting was under Chatham House rule, so no names. He expressed many critics about Russia, and during the next session, while speaking about situation in Libya, he told that the European Union should find contacts and should start negotiations with progressive Islamists in Libya. I don't know how to find progressive Islamists in Libya, and are there any progressive Islamists in Libya? But we should identify with whom we want to speak, with each other or probably with progressive Islamists.
I would probably add liberal Islamists.
Liberal.
We should also
liberal.
find some liberal Islamists, liberal democratic Islamists. I'm kidding, of course. Thank you very much, Nikolai. So now I propose the following logic. We will gather comments and questions and give a floor to Lukasz and Joseph at the end of the session to answer both the contributions of Sergei and Nikolai and of the comments and questions of the participants of these sessions. So who would like to be the first? Please, Ambassador Ainton.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A wonderful report, a very good step forward. Very well done comments. I don't want to speak about details. I want to speak about essential things. And the main question is, how do you see the Europe, space, European Union and Russia, or Eurasia in future? So you make proposals, you make explanations to achieve what? What kind of common or separate or space we will have in 5, 10, 15, 30, 50 years. I haven't seen, neither in the report nor in the comments, the answer to this essential question. Another point. So you say that one of the dominant thinkings today is that Russia and European Union could coexist. It's doubtful because coexistence is related to two systems. It's another notion related to other circumstances. Then you say that you think that it's better to cooperate, and your proposal goes in this direction. But in what? What are the differences between the so-called coexistence theory and your proposals? Where this new elements appears as far as the cooperation is concerned, and in what way cooperation prevails. The third essential question is, the dominant thinking in the European Union and USA is that Russia is the main threat. Not terrorists, not as radical Islam. Russia is the main threat. Why? Because European Union and USA, they believe that they created a system of economic and international relations in accordance with some basics. Russia and a lot of other countries do not think the same way. They think that it's not the case, and others in another way. Russia in a very pure form challenges such kind of beliefs, and Russia is needed to be a threat to impose this vision and this order. So if it's not the case, if we want to have cooperation, we need to change such kind of beliefs that the system is established and Russia must be either a part of this system or be destroyed, maybe with some other countries. So if we want cooperation, if we want something going beyond cooperation, we need to say we will change such kind of beliefs of such kind of a system, asking concessions from Russia in these fields and offering concessions in other fields. What concessions do you propose?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Next comments, please. Tatiana Glebovna, please.
First of all, I would like to thank the presenters for the report, very interesting report, and our two commenters for the extremely comprehensive and deep comments on this report. I strongly support the idea that we need, it's not a question, this is a comment, a point, that we need deep and serious discussion on the future European security system, because in my view what happened in our relations with Europe and with Euro-Atlantic demonstrates absolutely different perception of the role of Russia in this system, of the fact that Russia is not integrated into the existing system, which is NATO and EU centric, and that the main differences which were the reasons of the background of this very serious and terrible crisis between us, they are in the field of different perception of security as such, of such notion as indivisibility of security, of such notion if Russia should join the existing system or we should cooperate on the formulating of the new principles of the future system. I think that the same fact that this crisis happened should push both sides for understanding and for starting the very deep discussion on the future principles of the future European security or Euro-Atlantic security system. And I belong to the school of westernizers in Russia, but at the same time I do realize that the principle which was suggested to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union and of the Warsaw Pact, that you simply join the existing institution, it doesn't work. We had, both sides, we had several windows of opportunity of Russian integration into the system, probably not institutionally, but even institutionally. But still de facto, it didn't happen, and both sides are responsible for that. So in my view, as far as we are existing in the paradigm of deterrence, and not only in the field of hard security, even in the field of soft security, having in mind this economic wars, sanctions and counter-sanctions, we are obliged to understand inside the European and inside Russia that it's the red line for the future, and we should start, at least on expert level, at least to think about the, I don't know how we name it in the future, Helsinki 2 or the summit of the head of states for discussing the new principle of the future European security architecture. And the position, I'm so sorry, the position of Euro-Atlantic institution and of individual country, when you insist we are satisfied with the existing system and with the existing institutions, you cannot be satisfied because Russia is not a part and it provokes very serious problem. I will stop here. I will continue in the second part.
Thank you very much, Tatiana Glebovna. Academician Zhurkin, please. Academician Zhurkin is a member of our high-level ELN RIA group. Please.
First of all, I want to thank the authors of this report, which I very quickly looked through and didn't read carefully. And after careful reading, naturally, there will be some points with which I shall disagree, but from my point of view, the most important is the general trend of this report, which is aimed at the restoration and improvement of relations between Russia and the EU, and elimination little by little of the great political crisis which exists at the moment in our relations with the European Union. My remarks maybe because of my age will be politically naive. In this, though naturally the crisis is very serious, it is written here that it is the worst crisis since 1970s. I would say it is the worst crisis in half of century. Practically, if we look at the period which started sometime in 70s when the Soviet Union at last recognized that the European Union is not an imperialistic plot aimed at restoration of German militarism, like it was reported continuously in Soviet official statements, but that it is an inevitable development of economic forces aimed at integration. Since that time, naturally, today is the worst crisis. But what is very important from my point of view, that relations still develop. From my point of view, it is very detrimental and even diminishing for a great nation, and Russia is a great country, a great nation, to choose one separate important trend and to take it as a major trend of developing. Russia tried it once seriously, and the other time, a couple of years ago, so to say, in words. In the very beginning of the existence of modern Russia, Russia turned to the West, and it was clearly a one-sided direction towards the West. What Russia received as a result of this one-sided policy? First of all, no presence from the West, because the West has taken this trend as something for granted, though it was the result of a very serious domestic internal struggle in Russia. Secondly, Russia lost its position in the Far East, positions in Asia, not to speak about Africa and Latin America, lost its position in the Middle East, and only in a very small way is restoring it now, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. So, and finally, the decision was taken to eliminate this pro-Western trend and to develop a multidimensional and multi-centrum policy directed against the whole world. Orally, something like this was invented 2 years ago in our analytic community, not so much in political circles, but mostly in analytical community, that we shall punish the West for worsening of relations and develop our union with China, probably even maybe union against the United States and the European Union. Some very fast-thinking people thought. This trend also led nowhere, maybe with one positive conclusion, that really relations between Russia and China started improving, and it is a very positive trend. And the Chinese, who sometimes are more realistic than us, they explained very carefully, and very pragmatic people, that our partnership is very good, is very strategic, very important, and so on and so forth, but it should not be directed against anyone. And they, in a sense, they were right. From my point of view, the great power should have the foreign policy like a very big symphonic orchestra, which consists of many instruments and directed in every direction. Certainly, some priorities may develop in one way or the other, but in a very slight way. I should say that the word pivot here is used in your paper because the United States pronounced first military, and then the president pronounced the pivot from Europe to Asia, that 10% of American power, so to say, little by little will be turned to the Asian Pacific area. Till now, there is no such pivot in reality. And for a great power, it is very difficult really to transfer its regional trends from one direction or the other. So in this sense, my mild philosophical deliberation, I want to end with with my 100% belief that improvement of relations with the European Unions are inevitable. Inevitable for us, first of all, but because I am naturally thinking first of all about Russia and the Russian foreign policy, but in a sense inevitable for the European Union. How it will happen, it is difficult to say. But, and from this point of view, I think that such reports as this one, it is a very good beginning, and something like this our side should produce. And the general, I like very quickly look through it. I liked very much the last section of this report, which is aimed at diminishing, so to say, the crisis and increasing the opportunities. And this is, from my point of view, a very important appeal to us, which we should follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, Dmitry Danilov.
Thank you very much. I know that we have no time, but I have rather a short question just to the authors of this report, maybe. Just all we know that principles towards the relations with Russia were approved by foreign ministers of the European Union. So my question is very simple. What about these 5 principles? Who is the addressee or are addressees of these principles? If it is addressed mainly to the European bureaucracy, to Brussels, just maybe to European Union capitals, etc., etc., then where is there is the other side of relations? Where is Russia? And what about the relations with Russia? If Russia is Moscow is addressee of these principles, then you can understand fully that these principles are rather inappropriate for Moscow for many reasons. I'm very concerned about this new diplomatic language and new diplomatic approach by the European Union. And the other question is for me is could European Union really think about the global strategy without the global partners? This is a question. Who is your global partners? If Russia not, who else? Before it, European Union, before Ukraine, European Union declared that there are 3 main key strategic partners, US, Russia and China. Now it's obvious that Russia is not, China maybe too. And what about the United States? Yes, of course, United States is your strategic partner, but with increasing challenges and problems, also considering, for example, the TTIP negotiations, etc. What do you think about this? About principles towards Russia and about your future global strategy?
Thank you. Sergey Kulik, please.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I haven't read the report. Но не осуждаю. But I'll do even do that. In this connection, I was quite interested with Nikolai's remark about relationship between EU and EU-Russian Economic Committee. I think this is a very important point, and the short attention is quite concern. This, with all these illnesses and problems of the Eurasian Economic Union, it is really a reality. In this connection, we do, in our research work, we do a lot of stuff, important and not important. But some things do need enhanced research and attention. In this connection, I remember the leaked Mogherini's paper of January 2015, where she referred to the scientific research community of the European Union to provide an analysis about the relationship, economic analysis between EU and Eurasian Economic Union, with the message whether it would be a negative scenario or positive scenario, doesn't matter. Just make a good research. So 18 months have passed. I'm not now in this theme, so but I look at the sites of different institutions, but there is no such work done within the European academic community. But this is a very important question. If you really want to improve relations between Russia and EU, then you need to have a very scrutinized vision about plus and minuses between EU and Eurasian Economic Union. When you pay a lot of attention to TPP, to TTIP and other things, I remember that the next day after the agreement about TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, I had a paper of Bertelsmann Foundation about economic data, about pluses and minuses for European Union on this TPP. Though it was not published on the site, but I was lucky to be on the Global Economic Symposium in Kiel when it was distributed. But it was done. And nothing about such a, I think, major project like Eurasian Economic Union. Also, you have a lot of work done about, for example, relations between EU and ephemeral Silk Road projects. I'm talking about just pure economic analysis. But there is still no, there is a niche for research about the Eurasian Economic Union. So we, in Russia, we did it, but in European Union, no. So my message is that I think that it's time to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. I have just returned, get back from Vilnius, where I participated in a high-level conference organized by the port of Vilnius to attract Chinese investors within the Silk Road project. And at that place I understood that the project is not ephemeral, so $1 billion only at this tiny place. So,
I'm talking about ephemeral in terms of economic calculations.
Yeah. Well, it's unclear in terms of numbers, but things are going on there very rapidly. Thanks. Pavel, please. But please be brief because we have we are short of time.
Yes, I will be brief. So thank you very much for this presentation. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to read the report. I hope I will do it in the nearest future. It's a very uneven task today to talk about Russia-EU relations, because I would say that it is a bad time for building long-term scenarios. We are living in a very unpredictable world today, and what was pretty much predictable 10 years ago, and you could build all these scenarios. It is very difficult to build them today, and I mean, it was impossible to predict what happened in Ukraine. It was impossible to predict Brexit, etc. And there are so many unpredictable vectors in the whole Euro-Atlantic today, not only in EU-Russia relations. I would say that, as the last question on the list of issues indicates here, there is no single pathway to Russia-EU cooperation, because Russia and the EU should accumulate enough cooperation links and positive interdependencies to talk about this new historical rapprochement that we currently lost. And well, I would say that talking about security framework, it's a very difficult issue, because there are so many contradictions between not only Russia in the EU, but inside the Euro-Atlantic area itself, and there are so many layers of security, and I think it will be a topic of the second part of the session today. But if we look at interdependencies between the EU and Russia, they are quite simple, I would say simplistic, because, well, Russia generally exports oil and gas, and level of trade structure of imports from the EU is very simple as well, because there are only several major things that Russia imports from the EU. So if you talk about trade, obviously trade has to be diversified, and how to diversify it, this is the question to discuss. You mentioned I think science and technology in your paper. This is obviously a topic to be discussed as well, because it could be one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways to diversify Russia-EU relations. And I mean, I think diversification is the best word here, because the more complex structure of interdependencies you have, the more stable it will be. This is the way that the EU goes with China these days. You can see that EU-China interdependency becomes more complex, and in this sense it becomes more long-term and understandable, because Russia and the EU stick to oil and gas exports and security. Well, this relation, as it showed, it's already doomed. So we have to search for these new ways, and I think that such reports are very important to at least talk about it, to at least talk about importance of diversifying Russia-EU relations. So thank you.
Thank you, Pavel, and I will take the last comment within this session. Please, Marina Klinova.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for very interesting report and discussion, and to support the point of view of academician Zhurkin, and to add only one citation. Our politician, scientist, leader of the Constitutional Democrat Party in Russia, Milyukov, at the beginning of the past century told, Eurasia isn't Asia, it's Europe burdened with Asia. So I would like to say that after all, I hope that we'll arrange our relations with the European Union in the future. I can't say foreseeable or distant, but there is no other choice for the partners and neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Lukasz, Joseph, you have something about 15 minutes to answer all of these questions. So I understand that it will take 2 days at least to speak without any stop, taking into account all the comments voiced. So who would like to be the first?
I can go first.
Okay, Joseph, be the first.
First of all, thank you all very much, particularly to the two colleagues who presented first. It's incredibly pleasing to hear everyone engaged so much with our paper, and I'll go through some of the questions and some of the topics, but apologies that I cannot possibly cover all of them. On the suggestion that this paper the recommendations in this paper are solely, lifting of Federica Mogherini's 5 principles. Undoubtedly, there are similarities with our suggestion that the lifting of sanctions must be linked with the implementation of Minsk. However, I think it is unfair to suggest that our recommendations don't go beyond that. I think that we only really cover exactly one point. I mean, we talk about people-to-people relationships rather than solely the engagement with Russian civil society. We talk about selective engagement, yes, but on slightly different issues. And also, I think that the 2 main points in Federica Mogherini's principles on strengthening relations with Eastern Europe and Central Asia and on internal EU resilience are not covered in our paper, because I don't think that they are they're issues definitely that the EU must deal with, but they're not. They should not be presented as issues that Russia must consider when we are dealing with them. I think, however, Sergey, you have a good point on the EU-Russia summit about who attends the summit, and I think that the summit would need to also include some of the European leaders that obviously it's more fruitful to talk to. Regarding whether or not the UK can play a standalone role, and I think a point about whether or not the UK might engage Russia as a third partner in its relationship with the European Union, I think that's highly unlikely. I think that the only third partner the only 2 third partners that really matter in terms of the UK's relationship with the European Union going forward are the United States, which will play a largely neutral role in this relationship, but also the other third countries, members of the European single market like Norway, etc., might also play a role. But this isn't to say that Russia isn't an important consideration, but I think that the UK would be well aware of the animosity it would cause with other EU members if we started to suggest that our relations with Russia were a negotiating point on this matter. I think that Nikolai, I think that you're right that some of these things have been said before, and that that I'm sure people in this room have read, have been arguing this for a long time, and it's good to be with colleagues who agree. But I think that our paper in particular brings a lot of different trends together and a lot of different themes together, and talks about and tries to bring them all together in one place rather than have them in different papers and different articles. And I think that, however, whilst it has been said before, it clearly needs to be said even louder and louder, and hopefully making sure that the people in charge of current relations are still reading it, and obviously newer papers have a better chance of doing that. I think that on this trend towards core and periphery, and I understand colleagues in this room, and I understand when I read Russian colleagues talk about how complex it is to negotiate with the European Union, and how there are a lot of different groups who are unsure about which competencies are with member states, which competencies are with the Commission, and I'm sympathetic towards that, and I think that in considering research and negotiations between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union, which I'm fully supportive of for all the reasons that colleagues have said, I think that we need to bear in mind that whilst there's a lack of transparency about exactly how the European Union works, that same lack of transparency exists in our minds with regards to the Eurasian Economic Union. We are not yet fully aware as to exactly how it will develop. There have been problems in its integration so far, and these are not problems that the problems that the European Union has faced in the past. But with regards to whether or not we can launch into a full assessment of closer ties, I would think that would be incredibly difficult in the current context. Although, as a researcher, I will always endorse further research. It's good for business, and I think that where I see the difference between cooperation and coexistence, Ambassador, I think that coexistence might allow us to deal with some of the threats. It might still allow us to deal, to not get in each other's way in certain areas. But I think that I think the opportunities missed will be the most important area as to how coexistence and cooperation differ. In 20 years, we might have not had the potential cooperation with regards to China, for example, or in the Arctic. We might not notice, though, because we don't know what we could have had we not cooperated. And I think that is the key area. And I think Academician Jerkin, I think that, I should say that last year when I heard you speak in Moscow, your comments on the difference on Russia's position in both the East and the West actually inspired my thinking and Ian Kearns' thinking on this. So, and I think it's incredibly important to say. With regards to whether with Mogherini's 5 principles and whether or not they are addressed specifically towards Russia, I think that like all communications from the Commission and from the central Brussels, they are both addressed towards Russia and they're both addressed towards member states. And I appreciate this must be frustrating for colleagues here, but the attempts to get 28 or soon to be potentially 27 member states on the same page requires open dialogue, and I understand that might be irritating. Pavel, I think that with regards to unpredictability, it's an incredible problem for all of us in this room about how we think about long-term trends. And I think that this paper, we've tried to look at the ones with the most evidence. So, for example, on whilst things will fluctuate and things might change, in 10, 20, 30 years, China will be more important. And that's why we've included that. In 10, 20, 30 years, climate change will be an issue, which is why we've included it. In 10, 20, 30 years, the Arctic will be a more important theatre, which is why we've included it. And obviously, in those time frames, we'll come back and I'll think back to this research, and some of it will have changed. But hopefully we can I can say that we were right about some of them. But Lukasz, I don't know whether you want to add anything.
Yes, let me start with echoing Joe's praise for the comments, especially from Sergei and Nikolai. And again, on specific issues, we can expand further. Actually, our visas expire on Friday, so we're here until Friday, and very much looking forward to any further interactions. So just a selected pieces on the threats and putting the threats to each other as number one. I think on the European Union side, please do not underestimate the shock that the Russian actions, including annexation of Crimea, caused in the European Union countries, and the feeling that our core interests and our core beliefs about how the European security system and intergovernmental relations should be done, the feeling that it was challenged. And I think that explains the sanctions, that explains the change of the views of countries like Germany, which were previously considered much more accommodating towards Russia. And that also explains the 5 principles and the language on Russia at the EU global strategy. So I completely agree that the conflict is unlikely, but the idea that something has changed in a very, very significant way, it's still very strong. It might be diminishing, as Academician Jerkin said, but I think it's still strong enough to justify this kind of language that you've seen in the EU global strategy that was accepted only this month or last month. Which brings me to the issue of sanctions and the gradual move on sanctions. And here I would just to kind of underline that I think our position differs a little bit from the position of the Mogherini 5 principles. The problem is in the details, and right now for me the problem is that actually we go back and we lose even the limited progress that we had before on the ceasefire. We see the increased number of incidents and the increased number of casualties on both sides of the line of contact. So the first issue of the day would be to make sure that we are back to the ceasefire, and neither of the sides has the incentives to try and move towards a military solution or a military initiative. On the political part of the elections, I understand that Ukraine and I think a number of EU countries have really no interest in the pseudo-elections that would be done and supervised by the local militia, that would not be done according to the OSCE standards and would legitimize Mr. Zaharchenko or anybody else. So the issue of the EU standards of the details of the elections, we actually need to go one step further and talk about the details and the modalities of the elections, on which elements could be put in different packages. There were actually some ideas in this paper by Mogherini last year that was mentioned here. Then it was a little bit too early, but I think the ideas are still around on how to divide the packages. A number of questions on the European security architecture, European security system, and I think we are encouraged by the support this idea of discussing the system got here. It is clear that Russia will not join or rejoin the system as it was created before, but I'll just submit to you that we're not actually starting from a scratch and inventing new principles. I think most of the, if not of the Helsinki principles, are still valid as such, might require a different approach and a different interpretation, but I don't think that we need to reinvent the new principles. And I think several people mentioned one of our recent reports, which is the survey of the ELN members. More than 40 members basically gave us their views about the future of EU-Russia relations. And on the question about whether we should have a change of the European security system, a majority of 64% said that we need actually better implementation of the already agreed principles. 24% held the view that we need to modify some of the principles, and very small minority, I think of 1 or 2, said that we need to start from the scratch and go for the new principles. And the last issue here is that, of course, the system needs to take into account the interests of Russia, but it also needs to take into account the interests of other countries, including Ukraine, including Belarus, Georgia, and I dare to say, from my personal viewpoint, also Poland. Then the other questions. Why we failed to have a productive relationship? This is an interesting question that we avoided, because it inevitably brings us to the question, kto winowat? And then we can have a very long discussion on the topic. I got my personal view about the percentage of who is more responsible for the state of the relations that it is right now. But I think this is an interesting but slightly at this point repetitive discussion, in a sense that I repeat my arguments, then probably some of the Russian colleagues would repeat their arguments, and we end up with a number of narratives that don't really add up. Now, on the question of the end state, where is all of it supposed to go? I think Joe gave the partial answer. I would go and basically remind you of an old concept that some people think is discredited, some people even say that it's no longer viable, the concept of Greater Europe. And the idea that we can have common general principles, but also close connections between different groupings within the greater European space, some joint institutions, including still the OSCE, including Council of Europe, and greater economic interdependence. And this is not only about the European Union and Russia, but also the countries of the common neighborhoods, and importantly also about Turkey. I might be idealistic, but I come back to the idea of greater Europe as our end point.
There is nothing about it inside the paper.
I go beyond this since I was not one of the authors. I didn't manage to introduce the greater Europe into this paper. On the 5 principles, I think this is the common denominator for the EU member states and for the Brussels bureaucracy, reflecting the agreement of this particular moment. And finally, on the analysis between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, I think you just gave us the topic of one of the next research tasks for our team. And we are looking forward to also cooperate with our Russian colleagues, first of all, foremost REAC on this task, which seems timely and interesting.
Thank you very much, Lukasz. In this intention, both ELN and REAC coincide, because a big expert job is required to fulfill this task. Because EU and EU are the economic bodies, so we will need a huge expertise on data, on I think we had a very interesting and fruitful session. Now we may have a coffee break, and I propose to continue in 15 minutes with the second session on Russia-NATO relations. Thank you very much.